Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I am joined by Dr. Karl Pagenkemper.
Hello.
Hello. And Jess.
Hello, world.
There it is.
And Alex.
Boo.
Oh, was I supposed to be scared? Is there a ghost in here? That does remind me that we are very close to
2 days away.
to Halloween. Very, big a holiday for Christians. They really love it. One of the most celebrated.
Reformation Day, Eric.
Sorry, it's like Christmas, then Halloween. Easter. I forgot about Christmas, Easter, then Halloween.
Wow.
There it is, right? Is that how it goes for Christian holidays? No.
Thanksgiving got lost.
For Thanksgiving.
Speaking of Halloween or Reformation Day or whatever you want to call it, the one thing that stands out to most people is candy. At least for my kids, that was at least what it was always about initially. Less about dressing up, more about getting candy. What's the candy that you're most likely to steal from a child, particularly your own child, when you're under the guise of, let me make sure there's no razors or needles in this Reese's peanut butter cup?
That's mine, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup.
Is it? Okay.
And now my kids are old enough where when they go to, like last year when they were trick-or-treating, they would say, oh, can I get that for my mom? Or they would come back and they just would hand over the Reese's because they know.
I'm
That's
going
my
for the
fave.
Trader Joe's version of the Reese's Cup. I think they're just a little bit better.
Really?
Oh, man.
Interesting.
They are,
Some
trust me.
controversy.
I have not tried
That's a
that.
shout out to
try.
Mary
I have.
Claire if you want to know, because she loves those
And it's a
things.
little more dark chocolate, too, in that one.
Yes.
And so,
Yeah.
Okay. Now
That's a sale I just made. I want to work
Yeah.
for them someday.
Okay.
You would be really good at that. Yeah, that would be mine, though.
Sponsored by Trader Joe's.
Absolutely.
if only.
Alex.
I don't have like a standard every year one. So there's some candies that have been trending over the last couple of years.
Whoppers. Those are
No,
big.
my dad did mention that he would take those, and maybe that's why we don't like them. He would take
'Cause
those
you
from
never
ours
got
as a kid. Malted milk. What are they? Malted.
Milk balls?
Yes, that's what they are. So I didn't like
Sounds good.
those, but my dad loves them. Anyway, last year, 2 years ago, it was probably Sour Patch Kids. Last year, it was these little eggs. They were like little sour egg kind of things, kind of like a gummy or gummy bears. So I like to take those away from my kids and to make sure they don't eat them.
So you're kind of more in the fruit camp, the fruity.
The
Yeah.
fruity gummy.
Yeah, typically
guy.
that's it. I mean, I do like myself a Butterfinger or every so often a Reese's, especially there's definitely a difference between a Reese's that comes in the normal packaging and then the Reese's
Pumpkin.
that is a
Pumpkin
pumpkin
Reese's,
or the egg
Christmas
and
tree.
Christmas
Absolute
tree.
difference, yes.
And those are far more superior.
For me, it's the
Agreed.
chocolate to peanut butter ratio.
Yes.
Because there's a more thin layer of chocolate with more peanut butter. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
So I'm team pumpkin for sure.
That's what you're
for
stealing
sure.
from your kids?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. So is there any other? I'm going to go on a limb and say that most of the time people aren't giving out those Trader Joe's peanut butter cups out there.
No.
Probably not.
So what's below that? What's next?
Well, oddly, when my kids, I didn't steal from my kids. I just went with them
Oh, that's
to
good.
get my own. Kit Kats are usually pretty good. I think
So
it's
what
the
age did you
Crunch-
stop trick-or-treating, Carl?
Easy.
You went with them and got
My
your own
kids
candy?
are now 27 and 30. We don't go as often as we used to. But
Okay.
No,
you
my wife
dress
still
up?
loves to do this. So she gets all excited when kids come to the door and just to
Yeah,
plunk those things in.
fun.
And my wife's a dietitian. So her argument is everything in moderation and portion size. So don't eat 30 of them, but have one or two. They're good.
At least he's not just giving them apples or baby carrots or something when they come to the door.
Baby carrots, yeah.
Just one
Individual.
baby carrot.
No, just one. That's even worse. Give them a whole sticker. You peel it. Nope.
That's
nope,
good.
No.
That's good. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean,
I wonder what everybody else's
I know.
favorite candy is.
I'd
Share.
like to hear that.
If you
Yeah.
want to share.
Type that into the comments on YouTube or Facebook or email us.
Yeah. We'd love-
Podcast.
We care.
I feel like we're all, I mean, other than Alex, we're kind of team peanut butter cup around here. So, I mean, he said occasionally. So it kind of wins out.
I dabble. You know,
dabbles.
but
We, was it 2 years ago we did like a staff or was it Easter candy competition?
Yeah, yeah.
Like
It
a
was
March
this year.
Madness
Yeah.
thing, was it? And then I think a peanut butter cup won.
It ended
out.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like 2 Reese's things against one another. So by far, at least our Instagram fans here at CCC love themselves Reese's.
Just, match made in heaven. Peanut butter and chocolate. Can't go wrong.
Vicky Sutton, she was the face of it. I remember.
Yeah. Can't go wrong. All right. Well, that does it for our candy chat. It's good to get that, out there. It's
Feels
been
good.
good
Me a
therapy for
toothbrush while you're at it, too.
Yeah. We're going to go brush our teeth, actually.
Thank you.
But up next, we have headlines. All right, our first headline comes from USA Today. It says Kellogg's faces $5 million lawsuit for not having enough strawberries in its Pop Tarts.
What?
I wonder, my first reaction to this headline is when I was a kid, I remember the strawberry Pop-Tarts tasting better. But then part of it's just that bias of being a child where everything with sugar just tasted good probably.
And it's
then
like larger. And
then you taste it as an adult and you go, what was I thinking?
Maybe
Lucky
there's been
Charms.
less filling
Yeah.
since you were.
So it says Kellogg's strawberry flavored Pop Tarts need more strawberries, according to a lawsuit filed against the company in August. A class action lawsuit filed by Anita Harris, the Southern District of Illinois, argues that Kellogg's Cells company is misleading consumers by promoting the breakfast pastry's strawberry filling in its labels and marketing, giving an impression that the fruit filling contains a greater relative and absolute amount of strawberries than it does. And in reality, the company's strawberry toaster pastries contains 2% or less of dried strawberries, pears, dried apples, and then it has red 40 in it, according to all of our favorite, one of my favorite Halloween candy ingredients, red 40.
Chemicals.
So how are we feeling about this lawsuit? This pretty devastating for us.
Alex,
not
you
shocking.
look upset.
It's not shocking.
He looks.
He's like, I thought I was getting all the real strawberries
You're
every
like
morning.
internally processing
to
this.
me,
Are you okay?
I am not. I've never been a strawberry Pop-Tart fan. To me, it is always the brown sugar. So
So there was no disillusionment there. You were just like, I'm just eating sugar
yeah,
anyway.
I'm just, and also there is a right way to eat a Pop-Tart, by the way. This is just free information. You always have to eat it frosting on tongue first, so yeah.
I don't know what that means.
eat it upside
you eat it
down.
upside down.
Oh.
Well, I think that's
or
right
is
side
it
up.
right side up?
But I think I teach my kids that, that you have to have the frosting layer down. Kind of like if you eat a Pringle, like there's one side of a Pringle that is definitely more flavored. And so
Just to set that on your tongue.
yeah, so you have to eat the
a
bowed
Pringle
side.
kind of is shaped like your tongue. Like you could just set it there.
Yeah, but that's not the more flavored side.
Now we're getting into a whole nother debate.
This is like a weird
Wow.
food thing where you have to eat, like you're gatekeeping your kids eating.
I want them to have the best experience possible.
And you brought me on to talk about this.
Yeah, wow.
I'm not sure what to think about.
Carl, what side of the Pop-Tart do you put in your mouth first?
I have not in about 35 years. Truthfully.
You haven't had a Pop-Tart in 35 years.
It's probably been that long. I used to eat them when I was a kid, but breakfast of champions at that age. But nope, haven't had one in a long, long time. I couldn't tell you the last time I ate one. But I remember the chocolate ones were the only ones I cared about anyway. The brown sugar were close, but
Yeah.
fruit. Why would I want fruit at a breakfast?
Yeah. S'mores. That's where it's at.
Yep, s'mores.
Right up,
S'more- yeah,
right up
s'mores
there
are
with Lucky
good.
Charms and things like that. Good for me.
But I agree. And they probably, over the years, put less filling in them for sure. 100%. Even like the frosting, less filling. But I would say Pop-Tarts are one of those things you can definitely tell a generic between the original. Like the frosting on a generic is just like...
So you've actually done this too.
And you've
I didn't
tested
realize
generics?
that out of this we would learn so much about you.
You're just not a big Great Value toaster pastry fan.
Rarely.
Yeah.
I think
we should do a blind test. Now I'm curious.
it's student ministry. Like student ministry life. Like we had Pop-Tart days. We had like... Anytime you have a mission trip or whatever, that's one of the easiest things to buy and then make sure people are eating in the morning. I'm not going to bake them fresh bread.
Oh.
There's no kitchens where we do ministry at.
I
so.
saw a TikTok recipe recently where they took brown sugar Pop Tarts and lined the bottom of a cake pan, and then they put like apple pie filling on that, and then like I don't know, a cake mix and butter and all that stuff, and made like some sort of thing. I don't know. I'd try it, but
I've seen people
looks
keep
ridiculous.
Pop Tarts in their freezer too.
Oh,
They last for 30
Nice
years
and
longer.
frozen.
Is that the idea? I think they were already about 30
Just like
years.
a nice little frozen treat.
Oh, goody.
well,
Omaha note here, though. I was looking at an article, and there's a Kellogg's in Omaha. They don't make Pop Tarts.
Yeah.
So it's not them. They make Fruit Loops, Frosted Flakes, Corn Pops, and Apple Jacks. So
All right.
there you go.
well, now we know.
Local. So it's not
Quite-
the Omaha people that are
quite
robbing
the
you your
lawsuit,
strawberries.
though.
So I guess really the question here though is if they were to start putting more strawberries in the Pop Tarts because of this lawsuit, would that change anyone's mind at the table whether they wanted to participate in? I mean, strawberry Pop Tart, like, could you like even you think about? I was thinking about at home communion and how many times we've asked people during COVID to find something at like how many people have used Pop Tarts,
Pop-Tart.
and has that because it has the fruit in
Old
there?
Faithful.
Does it? Can it be both? Can
Oh,
it?
my heavens. I hadn't thought of that.
Like,
Interesting.
We're getting too
the
deep.
Strawberry turns into wine in your mouth somewhere.
Yeah.
I hear a theological controversy starting up.
That's why we had you here to talk
Yeah,
about
I know.
it.
I can see it coming.
So for at-home communion, Carl, can someone have just a Pop-Tart and count that for both?
Oh, my
It's
heavens.
gotta be a
well,
fruit
in the Catholic
one.
tradition, you actually only need one to handle both. But oh boy.
He's stepping away.
This is
Stepping away
taking
from this one.
so many twists and
Yeah,
turns.
this has gone in ways. You've seen the charts of,
From the
what's
original.
acceptable to which group of people. We don't use Pop Tarts when we've done it at home.
Okay. Thank
you.
All right.
I'll just leave it at that.
All right. To answer my question, more strawberries, would you be more likely to eat it?
Oh, it's suddenly become healthy now. Is that
Yeah.
what it
If
is?
That's
we
what I'm
knew that
asking.
there was
No.
like actual strawberries in it,
If they-
because
yeah.
I feel like the issue is that they are making it's more artificial now.
Yeah.
No, I'm not buying anymore.
I'm not okay. I'm open. You know,
And I don't mean to keep belaboring this article, but it makes me think of even like jams and jellies and preserves. Like I prefer a strawberry preserve because I want
Yeah.
the most actual strawberry in
you want
there.
to see the little
chunkiness
seeds
of
in
the
there.
flavor and
Yeah, I don't want
the
just
tastiness of it.
the jelly that's
much
just
sugar.
sugar and flavoring. So
I'm with you.
If it was closer to a preserve inside that Pop Tart,
Which it looks like on the box.
it does, but it's a lie. So, all right. Well, I'm really glad we could settle some real tough questions.
I'm sweating. I
Yeah.
am not ready for the rest of this. I don't know.
Yeah.
That took a lot out of me.
Well, we're gonna move on to something a little more light. We're gonna be talking about evil in this Halloween season. So buckle up. Here we go. Spooky season is upon us. That is what has brought this topic up, addressing evil. And I think it's one of those things where we are, it's kind of comes at us in different ways, different types of celebrations, costumes, movies, all sorts of cultural things that we engage with at this time of season, or we choose to or choose not to engage with. So it seemed like a good time to talk about evil and, how do we discern what's true wickedness and what is maybe not, or what's gateways to evil and etc.
Well, I think last week we talked about spiritual gifts, which we believe that there's a spiritual world
Right.
that is at work and gives gifts and works in and through us. And we talked about that in like the positive, this is the good part of it, but there's another side of that spiritual world too. So
Yeah. All right. Well, as we jump, as we jump into this, one of those things, there's a theory, the Scooby-Doo theory that we've heard about lately. Yes.
that's my best.
It's great.
Sorry.
It's entertaining. And that's that early, the early Scooby-Doo cartoons. At the end of it, they'd take the mask off. It was always a human, right, pretending to be the ghost, and the more modern versions of Scooby-Doo, that we saw this change where they'd take the mask off. It was a ghost under the mask, right? And so some might suggest that this is signifying a shift in culture where we're starting to maybe as a whole believe more in the spiritual realm is affecting the things around us versus it's always a human cause.
Yeah, I think there's like that naturalism versus supernaturalism. So that first, idea is that behind every ghost or boogeyman is an actual natural cause, like a person
like
was
a logical explanation.
Yeah, a person
for-
was pulling the strings or whatever, and that's kind of how it's set up. And then now, our world. I mean, even if you're on TikTok, if you're in anywhere, there's just more of a curiosity around supernatural that didn't have to be a person behind it. So I think it is an interesting, thought, that culturally we've moved there. I don't know whether Scooby-Doo was the full mover towards that, but there's definitely some of that.
It's just a reflection of culture, maybe,
And I think there's a curiosity to it. Like we're drawn to it. There's lots of TV shows that are around. I mean, Supernatural. There's a Supernatural TV show that has like 14 or 15 seasons. I mean, it's a draw that people are very curious about. There's Facebook groups about, hey, this could be like a double negative on a picture, but let me submit this and let's all now have a discussion around what this could be. There's a fascination around it.
We've always had a fascination with whether we're living in a purely material world. I think most through history have argued that we've lived in a non-material world. The idea of God, 400, 500 years ago, God was as real every day as the ground is to us. And whether it's Friedrich Nietzsche or whoever who has put the lie on the idea that God is important or even said it was dead, it has changed our world towards basically a very positivistic, materialistic world that says everything that happens is a product of something that we can explain. And as soon as we realize there was something beyond our explanation, re-enters postmodern discussions about the possibilities that are beyond our knowledge, including spiritual realm. So yeah, Scooby-Doo is just the symptom.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too philosophically heavy, but we live in a world where that has all changed, and it's been changing now since the 70s probably, maybe earlier.
Do you think what do you think were some of the causes of that rejection? Because obviously we see, like in biblical times, the early church, I mean, deities, God's supernatural things were just, always praying towards, always conjuring up, and then it did seem like there became this more naturalist want an explanation. What would you say kind of contributed to some of that?
There are several reasons. I don't want to tip them off like I have a list in my head, but clearly things like world wars tend to discourage the idea that we're really good.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem personally with evil. I've always had a problem with the massive quantities of evil at times and how far total evil can go. But people doing bad things and continuing down that line, but then watching crowds get online and whole countries being led by evil. So that's part of it. Part of it is the need to control our world. We believe we know something about it and want to control and shape our world. Part of it is just we realize that God doesn't answer always the way we think he should, and God is no longer under our control as if he ever was. And when he's not, we get discouraged and move different ways. And our whole society has just kind of gone different ways. But we're very spiritual. We're more spiritual than we were 35, 40 years ago. We're more aware of spiritual things. People are just as likely to believe in the spiritual world as they are likely to believe in God. Even if they don't believe in God, they're more likely to believe in the spiritual world as something that's beyond us, even if it's aliens.
Yeah.
So wide open.
As the move into modernity was kind of a shift where we saw, and we had an episode on this, but it was, it's a reliance on mankind, on science and things like that. And I think you mentioned the war. I mean, there's an example of people even saying, "Look what we accomplished with our own will, with our own strength."
And you had a face of evil too in a lot of those world wars, from Stalin to Hitler to these just evil, which we would call evil people that were a face attached to it, not necessarily a spiritual. Even though I think there was a spiritual war being fought there too, but like you had a physical war being fought, led by physical cavalry.
I remember in California, I was in a class with a guy. I was taking a class in the Holocaust, and nothing galvanizes your heart more than realizing how Christians are around the edges and even somewhat complicit in what went on in the Holocaust. But I'm sitting next to a student who's taking a course entitled Comparative Genocide. And I wanted to put those two words together. We were studying the Holocaust. You mean there are other things to compare with this? So it's not new. It's not all that uncommon. And they just started ticking off things just this century. Well, at that point, it was in the late 90s. So it was just, that's my problem is the complexity of evil. And ultimately, modernism just collapsed on itself. It's proven to be unsatisfying. We can't invent meaning and significance and love out of whole cloth. So we move in other directions.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot.
That went very quickly from Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, it did. It's one of those
bit,
heavy things where, I mean, there's so many parallels you can draw even when you start talking about, Hitler and Nazis and Nazism and how everything now, when someone feels like their freedoms are encroached on,
it shuts down every discussion.
Oh, this is the Hitler of that, or this is whatever. Comparing that type of evil, it loses some of its meaning, I think, and all of that.
I think some of the draw, though, for Christian, and where we maybe get into some of the discernment conversation is like, passages in Romans that are like, okay, we've been instructed to hate what is evil and to cling to what is good. And so I think as a Christian, we have this natural desire, like even as I was parented, to start to, okay, what is evil? If I'm supposed to hate what is evil, I need to have a knowledge, a discernment of what is evil, and then what is good for me to cling to. And so I think that starts to draw like our curiosity as Christians. It starts to invite us into, okay, how is this a part of the discipleship process? Like, how do we start to make those decisions maybe?
Well, go ahead, Karl.
I was only going to say that the hate and love is, I want to say this carefully, it's a Semitic idiom. That is to say, Jesus doesn't call us to hate our parents.
Yeah.
He calls us to prefer our Lord. So he doesn't say, hate your mom and dad. He uses those words, but the idiomatic idea is that we are to make preference for God and his ways. And I think, yes, you hate what is evil, love what is good. That's a way of saying pursue something and avoid something else. Evil is hard to avoid in the world. Don't be like it. Don't be like that world. So even the language we have to understand in its context of what is he implying? Well, we pursue that which is good. That's upright. So discerning what is good, that's another discussion. But even identifying how to behave, because evil is all around us, and Christians of all people ought to actively resist that which is destructive for human image bearers. That sounds theological right there. I just had to throw that image bearing in. So
yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of Scooby-Doo, I think one of the things that was, in the kids genre that opened a lot of younger generations recently into, spiritualism and things like that was Harry Potter. That was one of those books that were, it was popular amongst Christians. I think.
And reviled among Christians.
Right. Yeah. It was. It was secretly popular amongst Christians because the author has had some Christian views, and she kind of even tries to compare some of her writings to almost a biblical parable in a way or something like that. But yes, the other side is it was also kind of almost embraced the same way a lot of the things during the satanic panic of the 90s and things like that, where this is evil, this is leading to witchcraft, this is, so I think people fall on both sides of it. I remember there was a Christian bookstore in Omaha, I won't mention the name, who they secretly sold the book, but you had to ask for it and they would go to the back room and get it for you.
Keep it under the desk.
That's some insider info, Eric.
Wow.
It was quite the...
That leads me back into the 70s and some drugstores, but I'm not going to go there.
It's a different product they kept.
Oh, my heavens.
That's not Coca-Cola.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think parents are concerned about those sorts of things. Like, are they opening up a gateway to demonic or evil things in their homes for children?
Well, I got to confess, I was in Cal at the time when the first books came out, and I remember my wife and I were in England, and the first 2 books had come out in that series, but they hadn't come out in the United States. So my wife actually ordered. We got the book at a bookstore in England, and I was reading one of them on the way back on the plane, and I thought, this is a lot of fun. It actually was very, very fun. And I thought, we're going to go read these books to our kids. Now, I should never say that in public to some of our friends in California, because our kids were actually afraid to bring it up at the school they were at the time. But we enjoyed that series, and our kids, it became a tradition in the house just to read these things to our kids. Mm-hmm. And but the key for me was always, let's have this conversation in public as a group and say, what do we think? And they understood the distinction between real evil and what was going on in the story, and some of the magic elements, which they found fascinating, just like they did cartoons. So they weren't. I was not really worried about that for my family. Mm-hmm.
Yep,
that's not true for every family.
A series I remember as a kid, because I think Harry Potter was maybe upper elementary, middle school-ish for me when it was maybe gaining its popularity. I don't know, but I remember Goosebumps. Like, I remember I had friends who had like the Goosebumps series, you know, and like I was not, you know, supposed to like be into the Goose. And I'm a fearful person anyway. Like, I think that's just like, I remember just growing up and like my parents like tease me sometimes about like to take out the trash at night. Like, I would have to, like, my little sister's like way smaller than me. Like, I would make her like come out with me to take out the trash because it was dark. And so I always kind of had like a hesitation towards those kinds of things. I think tied to like our house being broken into when I was really little, as I like digest that through counseling and conversation. Like, okay, that makes sense. Why? But so I've always had like that fear of even flirting with that kind of stuff. But I remember that series being like, no, don't do it. And then kind of grew into Harry Potter, like not really a series that you get into because there's witches and all that. And so for me, it was the opposite. Like, my parents weren't reading that to me, but my wife, her parents were, you know? And so now we're navigating that conversation together with our kids. So.
I feel like there's also a lot of confusion because it's like, you can't, for me, I couldn't read Goosebumps. There was a TV show too. But then there was like a Frank Peretti kids series that was also dealing with the same thing, just from a Christian perspective. So even from a young age, I remember being confused on how come this isn't okay and this is okay, and kind of like even starting that journey of recognizing and discerning like how much could I handle. I even had a family member, and this is just even a recent conversation of, are you letting your kids watch Fantasia Mickey? And we have like a Fantasia, like Mickey dressed as a wizard, like in our house as a stuffed animal. And like, is that in your kid's bedroom? Like, maybe you should not have that type of thing. And so I think the discernment piece and kind of, recognizing just all the different ways that we've been influenced. I even think of in that Twilight too. That was a big thing when we were in college of just all these fantasy, just, I guess, perceptions of evil and how we interpret that. But I've always been like, okay, Harry Potter's in the front. Why are we worrying about that? But then we're like justifying all these.
The back door comes in the back door.
When as we start to talk about discernment a little bit, I remember being a kid. Maybe I was, I don't know, somewhere between 7 and 10 years old, and we were traveling to California, and we stopped in Nevada at Las Vegas, and
Are you going to tell us what happened there?
I'm going to tell you what happened in Vegas.
Okay.
It doesn't always stay.
Breaking the rule.
But I remember we went into this restaurant that was, obviously they're all connected to casinos or whatever. And I was terrified as a kid because it's like I grew up in a church that spoke against gambling and all that type of lifestyle and everything. And I mean, I think at a younger age, you're always a little more sensitive to the kind of supernatural realm a little bit. As you get older, you kind of just, you build like calluses around some of those feelers or something. But I remember being so scared, and I think eventually my parents ended up, we just went to like a Denny's or something. And I look back on that, and I think when I was younger, I thought, wow, look at me. Like I was so discerning in that moment. I was so sensitive to all those evil spirits around me. And as I get older, I think there's a really important definition that you kind of have to make and realize that sometimes things that are new, different. Maybe they are bad. Maybe they're morally neutral, whatever it is. But the experiences that you haven't encountered can so easily be misconstrued as evil, no matter what.
Yes.
Just because you do not understand what you're encountering. And I think that when you have discernment, you almost have to be able to discern what you're experiencing. And that's one of those things where it was just an experience that as I'm older, I look back on that a lot and go, okay, when I walk into a situation, is this fear-based, or is there actually something happening in this moment that I should be concerned about? And so many times, if you strip that away, you realize that you are fearful because you're encountering something different than your normal day-to-day experience. And that doesn't always mean it's evil. Doesn't mean it's not evil,
Right.
but I think a lot of times as Christians, we're almost positioned to just jump right to, this is evil because I don't understand it. This is evil.
Eric, that just brings up for me too. I mean, I have had just a struggle. I think I process things a little bit slower as an adult because growing up, it was so black and white of like, this is okay, this isn't okay. Like, this is evil, this is like acceptable.
Yeah.
And so then kind of growing up in that fear-based, like it's even brings in other pieces of like shame, being curious about that, or guilt of I watched that or I did that. And then even now as an adult processing, I remember getting to college and it was like, okay, I'm away from the church I went to and my parents. Like, how do I process all of this? And I even struggle sometimes, years away from college, just processing things a little bit slower just because of that, where this, I think, is part of like making our faith our own of, okay, what is right, what's okay, and kind of, it's almost like a sifting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
for me.
Well, in raising kids, one of the challenges we had was hopefully to help our kids begin to make some of those decisions before they were on their own.
Yeah.
If we wait until I've been in the Christian school world for a while, and but I went to a public high school, and I went to a state university. If I had not been swimming upstream, I probably would have flashed out. Be honest with you, I needed to swim upstream a little bit, but I felt like I had made some of my decisions before I went there. And so did I get washed along a little bit? Yeah, a little bit. I still like rock and roll music. In fact, my dad and I used to listen to some of that. My dad was, he was a 20s to 40s era. Was in the World War II. But he wanted to process it with me. I want to process some of that with my own kids because I actually want to be able to trust them to make wise decisions.
Yeah.
And the answer is, do they not make wise decisions? Sometimes they don't, even now.
And I will say, just using you as an example, Karl, I came out of a home, and like I said, processing, and people like you that were parents like the way that you were, and just other professors, were kind of a safe place to land for people who are processing. And I feel like that's just like the type of person I want to be too. It's just to help people process through those types of things, like what is good, what's evil, or what's this or that. And I think having that, I don't want to call it like meeting in the gray area, but I think some freedom in discussing the black and white of what's right.
Well, I think a lot of it is gray area. I think that's exactly right. I think we're raised typically in a very black and white with not a lot of gray. Okay, we really don't care if you wear blue or black socks. But we discovered that there's a whole area of gray that goes on in most of our lives. And coming to terms with it, I think that's why Paul actually talks about it quite a bit, way more than we suspect most times, including in the spiritual realm. But he does talk a lot about gray areas, and we have to learn our ways into that to realize that gray, for some people, some of those gray areas that you and I live with will not be gray, and it scares them. And I have to live with that person and be kind. And just as they are going to have to live a little bit with others who are not the same, diversity in these areas make up churches. And we live in churches that are highly polarized right now. There's not a lot in the middle. This is just another manifestation of that polarization, I think.
Yeah, and I think another word that goes along with discernment, which is, it's a word that anybody uses in culture, but I think it's a very churched word, right? There's a gift even of that. But the other side of that coin is legalism. And I think like a lot of us, especially if you were raised, and I think the 90s were prevailingly more legalistic probably than they even are now, not just in our own lives, but I think in church culture. And so that's the balance of trying to flirt with, okay, how do I because as I look back on some of those decisions my parents made that, maybe at times, when I'm a teenager or college, I want to say they were just legalistic things. But as I parent, and I start to wrestle with this, I'm like, no, there's probably discernment that they were using, some discernment in there. And I just wanted to reject it. But I think the conversation piece is what I think starts to bridge those gaps of, the why. And I think the church, has done a bad job at telling its people the why, in discipleship. Why not listen to Harry Potter, or why not listen to rock music, whatever it might be, to give some of the, hey, here's reasons maybe why not, that it's not feeding your soul really well. But we've just said, hey, here, just don't do it. And then you tell your kids not to do it. And that just creates like this ripple of maybe the reason somebody had behind it was based on really godly wisdom and discernment. But then throughout the layers, it gets lost on us. And then that's when I think it becomes legalism, because you're like, I don't know why. Like I would always say this when I was a middle school pastor. Whenever I said, all right, guys, at the end of this, I'm just going to ask you to fold your hands and close your eyes. And here's why we do that. Like, we do that because, like, there's no magic in this, but we're just distracted people. You're middle schoolers and it's easy to get distracted. So this is one of these things that helps us, like, not worry about our buddy and have a moment with God. But I think that's one of those folding your hands and closing your eyes. There's no biblical precedent for it. But it's wise. There's good discernment in it, but then you can become very legalistic about something that simple.
Yes.
And I find
Very
myself
true.
doing that to my kids sometimes at dinner. I'm like, Britton, no, don't have any food in your mouth while we're praying. And there's nothing, nothing super spiritual about that. And I'm trying to teach them respect and authority and reverence for God in the middle of all of that. So.
Yeah, bless the Lord,
good
O my
word.
soul, and all as it is within me. Oops, I already put it in there.
Yeah.
If we give them a sense of gentleness about it and whimsical about it, it's not quite so serious. You take yourself less seriously and the Lord a lot more seriously. Our problem for me, and I don't know, maybe you saw this, is that there's a black and white. For them, it's okay. For you, not so. And I think sometimes we approach our kids that way. We have to give the kids and ourselves a certain amount of flexibility in a world that itself is very gray in a lot of things. But if everybody's around saying, that's not so gray, I've heard that from seminary profs. I have it ringing in my ear from 30, 40 years ago. That's how loud that was at the time. For them, it's okay. For you, not.
Yeah.
Really? Why?
Well, and I think the why, that's how you respond to the why is always important. I mean, even this morning I was driving my kids to school and my son's back there because the windows were foggy and he's like drawing pictures on the window. And I always tell him, please don't do that. Because I hate when they do that. And
all the parents are saying yes.
And every kid loves it.
And so I kind of abruptly was like, hey, don't do that. And I kind of checked myself in the moment. I didn't give the why. And so older sister's defending little brother. Why can't he do that? Like Dad, you're being so square. What's wrong with you? Like just let him. And so I took the time. I said, well, there's oil on your skin. And when you draw whatever thing you were just drawing, it's going to be there forever until someone takes like a cleaner and scrubs it and the oil stays there. Oh. And it just sunk in, it clicked with them. Oh, it was like that difference between me just going, well, because Dad said so, just don't do it, but I think that's such a minor example, but it is those things where sometimes that why, like you mentioned, Alex, it just isn't, it's not always there. We're not always backing up our statements with why. But I think the other side of legalism too, is that when we're talking about evil, when we're identifying evil, it comes into morality sometimes, where that can be also something that is on a spectrum from black to white, and in different cultures, different societies. And we look at things from a moral perspective a lot of times, where it's like this is what I believe is good, this is what I believe is bad, versus when we aligning that with scripture. And so then it's easier for people to go into certain situations and say this is evil, this is I mean there were extreme talk show hosts claiming that Hillary Clinton and Obama were literal demons, and you saw a whole alt-right movement of people just jumping on board and going, yeah, that's true, they're demons. And at some point, that type of talk, maybe, like, to me, from I'm just going, oh, that's people are just being hyperbolic for the sake of winning an argument. But then you start to realize that, well, no, there's people that are actually believing these statements. And then that's where it gets kind of scary to me.
Well, the thing that frightens me in an age that distrusts authorities, the problem is we can find smart people who believe anything. And the ability to go out and find someone who believes what I'm already predisposed to believe, it's very simple. And if you're on social media, it'll pop up once you start looking at them because it just keeps reinforcing itself.
Yeah.
So the tendency is very... Now, legalism is a challenge because legalism, at least inside the church, is designed to what pleases God. And I'm not sure that's always as clear, but the law-based mindset that says if I do these things, God is pleased. And we know it. If I share Christ with somebody, you know what? I think the Lord is pleased. Got it. And when that starts to trickle into this is what the Lord is leading me to do, therefore we should all do this and you should do this. This is the way you should move forward on this stuff in your behavior. That's where legalism gets carried away, is when you start to enforce those on everybody else.
Yeah, I think Paul, you said he talks about it a lot in one of the passages. I think people use this around drinking a lot or, whatever, eating. But, he says in 1 Corinthians 10:23, I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. So I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. And so there's this invitation in there to start to process, and I think it helps us know there's gray area that we need to have conversations about, we need to pray about for each of us. And so I think there's a few things maybe that to throw out that are maybe associated with evil a lot in our culture, and maybe talk about like what are our opinions on those? Are those things that we feel like we've made discernments on or we wouldn't? So like I think one of them is that I had a recent conversation with last week was about yoga. And so knowing
The bear?
Not yogi, yoga. And so
Yogi Berra.
and I think some of it is knowing, like Halloween for one example, we know there's some, in Christmas too, we don't want to talk about that, but there's some pagan rituals and birth, a lot of these things were birthed out of maybe some pagan or some evil.
Well, and even the history of like early Christendom co-opting those festivals and things like that for Christianity, just because the people didn't want to get rid of their celebrations. They're like, oh, okay, well, let's co-opt this and make it work.
We'll take our religious behavior and stuff it into yours.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, that John does that in John 1. He takes the word logos and stuffs it with his own meaning, and suddenly we're now all thrilled with that. There's a balance in there somewhere. I've never been bothered by it that much.
Yeah.
So when we talk about like yoga, haunted houses, horoscopes, Ouija boards, Harry Potter, witches and wizards.
You just listed a lot of things.
Tarot cards, mediums. Are there things on there that you're
Slasher movies.
Slasher movies. Are there things on there that like on that just that list that I said that you're like, there's definite no's for me, or there's definite like, I'm not going to entertain that. And are there things that you're like, I'd probably approach that cautiously, and then things that you're like, yeah, what's the big deal? Just as you kind of glance at that. Like for me, I'll say like Ouija board, that is like one of those things I'm like, no way, no how I'm going to mess with that. Horoscopes, it's something that I'm like, I'm not going to mess with that. Not as deeply as the Ouija board, but I think to me it's like one of those things that, or tarot cards, anything that's doing with a medium and calling spirits that are outside of the Holy Spirit, those are things that for me, and I think using even Paul's passage, and I think even past that, not even the everything is beneficial thing, but I think those are things that are inviting purposefully evil or other kinds of spirits into it. But then I know people that would say that about yoga, and I'm like, no, I don't believe that. Or haunted houses, slasher movies, and for those, I'm like, let's use wisdom, let's use discernment at the right age. I don't go to haunted houses or do slasher movies, but that's just, like I said, I can get fearful and I can have dreams pretty easily based on those things. And so, what about you guys?
I think mine kind of fall in alignment with what you said, Alex, of the Ouija board, tarot cards, mediums. To me, it's like something that's like directly taking my eyes and focus and attention off Jesus to do that thing or looking for answers. To me, those are things where it's like I'm looking for answers outside of my faith. And so those to me are things that would be inviting something evil. And those are obviously like, it's not a hidden secret that people are talking to spirits, and I would go as far as saying like just conjuring something up that's not spiritual. But to me, like there's a hard line between like yoga, haunted houses or movies, reading Harry Potter, and like Halloween costumes. And then there's this other side of like Ouija boards, tarot cards, mediums.
Oh gosh, I was thinking that's a great.
It's hard. It's like almost like, okay, put this in black and white now. But
And those,
those
threw
are,
down that
good,
list
though.
of
Those
things.
are, I think those are great.
It's a good list,
Yeah.
and I'm going to jump in here with a little bit of Bible just for the fun of it, because Bible tells me just how gray and challenging this is. And between and you mentioned 1 Corinthians 10. Well, the section in 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10 ultimately goes into a topic of meat sacrifice to idols, and in the ancient world, first century world, most people don't eat meat because they're not wealthy enough to eat meat. They ate a lot of vegetables, and occasionally when they did eat meat, they'd usually have to get it from the marketplace unless they were a shepherd or something like that. So meat that was available in almost every venue in the ancient world was meat that was sacrificed to idols. That's where most of it went. So Paul's mindset is interesting, and the challenge of 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10 actually gets a little weird. First, meat that's been sacrificed to idols that's sold in the marketplace, Paul says, don't worry about it. There's nothing there. Now, if someone you know is bothered in conscience because they came out of a culture that sees that as bad, you know what? You just don't ask, or you don't eat. It's simple as that. Mm-hmm. But Paul gets a little more sophisticated than that. He actually, we know historically that around the ancient temples, there were a lot of rooms. And in those rooms, they were like restaurants. If you were going out to eat at nighttime in Corinth, where you went was to the temple, because there were rooms. We can still see the base of them because we can tell where the seats were, where you might have 8 or 9 people in a given room, and somebody from the outside would actually come in and serve you food. And they knew perfectly well, this is meat offered to idols. Paul doesn't seem to be bothered by that either. What he's worried about is when you go into the temple, this is where you get into idolatry in chapter 10, you don't get the right to go in and partake of the meat as a service of worship like you do communion. That's when he triggered. That becomes idolatry. And Paul says there's no union there. That's why you get 2 Corinthians 6. That's why you get 1 Corinthians 10. This language of idolatry matters. And according to Romans, particularly 1, everything that spins out of control is a product of idolatry. That's a Jewish world. So idolatry has fouled you up. And when that gets there, Paul's mindset mostly is one of conscience, and there's a huge area, but you can't go into the temple and partake. Outside of that context, if someone is bothered in conscience, you know what? Back off. Not because there's deep problems there, but as a courtesy to another believer for whom Christ died. So I think this area is not a firm, like I can put a box and say this is in, this is out. I think by inviting demonic activities, if that's what you're doing in Ouija board, because I've never messed with them. Not because I just wasn't attracted to one, and I haven't been typically attracted to those. But if you're messing around with that and you're intentionally inviting it, what kind of moron are you? Why would you do that? Because you know it's real, or you do. Why would you mess around with it? But is it axiomatically wrong? I don't even know how to get into that discussion. It borders into the idolatry, and then I say, okay, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. Not because it's even spiritually bad, but because it's idolatry, and that places something other in front of God. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. That's. I think we've really goofed up on the gray issues just because of that. So meat offered to idols. People come back from the field and say, don't bring certain items back from the field because they might have been involved with sacrificial. And I want to say, why would meat offered to idols be okay, but that not be okay? I'm just scratching my head, unless there is a conscience issue, and then I may need to step back. That's controversial, but guys who are doing 1 Corinthians work right now are smack on that discussion for the last 25 years.
Well, and I think from my perspective, I'm always shocked at how superstitious Christians are.
Fearful.
They let fear drive them. And I don't see that in scripture, that's something that we should let that guide us, and just when in this list, there's all kinds of things, right? Yoga, different types of religions are tied to that. I mean, you have the Ouija board, which was marketed as right next to Monopoly.
I didn't like Monopoly either. Yeah. That's okay.
I mean, I don't know. Monopoly goes so long. Maybe I'd rather have a Ouija board. I don't know. But it's just one of those things where I think so many times as Christians, I don't know. I almost wonder if we actually would give God credit for how powerful he is, as much as we tend to believe these evil demonic things have power over us. What type of difference could we make? Like, I think Christians are more tempted to believe that evil has more control in their lives than God does, because they're always looking under every rug and behind every bush and around every corner for something to call evil and something to call demonic and something to call whatever and to blame for everything. And I just wonder, like, where do we draw the line and say, I'm putting my trust in an almighty God who created me, and I have been given the Holy Spirit to discern these things, and I don't have to go through my life in fear constantly and give so much credit to the enemy about everything that's going on in a world that's already fallen and broken, and we understand that. But yet I feel like it's my job and my duty to stand up and point out every evil thing that someone else is doing, as if I'm actually accomplishing something for the good of the kingdom of God, where a lot of times it's more of just this moral high ground that you're taking to try to, assert yourself as some superior being compared to the other fellow Christians. And it becomes frustrating to me at a certain point, where it's just this constant, oh, well, that's evil, you shouldn't do that. Oh, that's bad, that you shouldn't do that. And it's like, yeah, there are practical things, like we have mentioned, like that you should not be entertaining. But the idea that they are so easily brought on to us by, I watched a Harry Potter movie. I remember being, I don't know, in my 20s, and I put on a Harry Potter movie when I was visiting my parents, and I remember my mom not being very upset with me about it. And it was just one of those things where I didn't get it, but then we talked about it, and you just realize how much of it is, there is a good place that comes from in people, where it's like, yes, I love my family. I want to protect my family. I am so scared for their eternal life that I want to make sure that they are safe. And that's where my mom's heart was in that. But yet for me over here going, okay, well, it's just fun, Mom. Like, so I think what you said, Karl, was so impactful for even me to hear that, like, okay, all right, they don't want to eat the meat. Like, we won't eat meat. Courtesy. That's fine. Hey, everybody, sorry for a quick cut. I had to interrupt here. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. Imagine that, an episode on evil and things of the mysteries of this world and the spiritual realm, and we have the last 15 minutes of our episode got corrupted. So we wanted to wrap things up well. And what was lost was a moment that we asked Karl about Ephesians 6. It's a scripture that, one of the few scriptures that actually talk about, our defense against the spiritual realm and what that looks like. And so we brought you back in the studio. It's just me and you, but I figured okay, we need to put a good bow on this episode. And
that episode needed a bow, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. We couldn't just end it abruptly.
It was kind of all over the place.
So,
well, the question as we originally framed it was along the line of spiritual encounter and stuff like that, and how it fits in, because Ephesians 6 is one of the few passages. It's not the only one. I mean, we see a lot of it in Jesus' life, but it's one of the few epistolary literatures where we actually see some direct teaching on it. And I've always found it to be a passage that kind of, we miss the point. We're busy in a Halloween time trying to create an armored person when, in fact, that isn't the point of the imagery. The imagery is to, he uses this picture of a warrior or a soldier and takes parts of it and adds definitions or characteristics to it. So, and we know the background, because if you're looking at a New American Standard, and you can see that, there are small caps, and the small caps are designed to tell you that it's echoing Old Testament. So when you say, he reads, stand therefore having girded your loins with the truth and having put on the breastplate of righteousness, these things. What Paul is doing is he's alluding to images that every Jew would have understood. In the Old Testament, particularly Isaiah 59, Isaiah 52, some of these passages where God is a God who comes and defends and wars on our behalf. And he fights with certain things. He fights with righteousness. He fights with truth, just like the Battle Hymn of the Republic. His truth is marching on, things like that. These are the things he fights with. And when Paul talks about warfare, he puts it in the context of the Old Testament of a God who warfares on our behalf. This is a picture of something that's going bigger in the book of Ephesians, and I'm forgive me for dropping back into this a little bit, and because it comes out of Ephesians 5:18. It was a passage that came up in a discussion actually with a bunch of people from our own district recently about the Spirit, where it says, "Don't get drunk with wine; that's dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit." And a lot of times, what we do is we take this imagery and we take the word "filling" like it's a cup, and we're going to put the Spirit of God into that cup, and obviously we leak, so the Spirit has to keep adding more and more. But if I look at the construction, the actual language underneath that, it is highly unlikely that the Spirit is the content of that which fills us. Because you're going to see in Ephesians in different spots, some points God fills the world, Jesus fills his church, all these things. The filling here, though, is not likely to be, if the construction with this particular verb and this particular preposition usually has the idea of we are filled by something, not with something. So what we're filled with is not the Spirit, but with his character. So what God does is he fills his community and individual believers with the character of God, which is what the book of Ephesians, to some degree, all about identity and who we are. One of the things he puts in there is his character. So when we get to Ephesians 6, it's going to talk about how do we live in a world where there is spiritual conflict. And the answer to that is that God fills us with these characteristics of truth and righteousness and the gospel that creates peace. And that's not just vertical peace, but horizontal peace that goes on between Jew and Gentile. These things, which is really telling in racial contexts, because he's dealing with Jew-Gentile, and the gospel is designed to create peace between differences of massive proportions. So the character of God, the way to deal with spiritual warfare is not figuring out how do we dress like we're going out to a Halloween party, but how do we allow God to put his character. Does that make sense? You're welcome to ask questions and jump in, because otherwise this feels like a monologue.
Well, no, it's good, because I think the interesting part you bring up, though, is that even in this scripture, it's specifically talking, I think you said it, about a vertical or a horizontal piece, not a vertical piece. And I think that's, that goes a long ways to the other things that we experience in this world, whether it's just division of opinions or even division within our own church, capital C church, and I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, the spiritual warfare is very real, but this is not about exorcism. This is about how do we resist and stand, and that's the primary posture of the believer, is resist, stand against. The word stand shows up 4 or 5 times in this particular passage, and the notion of resistance is familiar from here. It's familiar from 1 Peter, that you resist the devil, he will leave. It does not tell me everything there is to know about demonic activity, but it tells me that the dominant mode of warfare is, first of all, God filling me with himself, with his character, so that I would be the kind of person that can resist the evil one. That's the number one posture.
How does this correlate, do you think, with even something like 1 John 4? I'm terrible at quoting scripture, so is it where it's talking about it's not it's not it's him who is in me.
Yeah.
not-
He who's in you is greater than he who's in the world.
Yeah.
That's interesting because in that particular passage, he who's in the world is probably a reference to false prophets.
Oh, okay.
And while
Not
some people
necessarily
want
the
to
demonic
link,
or-
some people
okay.
want to link it up with Satan and he's in the world, but the context of false prophets is the dominant, and the teacher who's in you is more has more truth, more strong, has more power than the one who is in the world, who is filling your church with false teaching. That doesn't mean that it's not true that God in us is stronger than Satan. It's just not the point of that particular passage.
Gotcha.
We often steal passages and have an idea and grab the passage and shove our own truth into that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's true, but it's almost true by accident.
Yeah.
So in this particular case here in Ephesians 6, I think Paul, in one of his more mature epistles, is giving us, this is the dominant mode by which we deal with spiritual realities. Sure, it's vertical to some degree, and peace matters vertically, because even in Ephesians 3, where he talks about, or Ephesians 2, where we're brought together, we're united to Christ in peace, but we're united to each other first before we're united to God. So these depends on how you're reading Ephesians 2, but either way, the point here is the character of God. That's what he's getting after.
Yeah. That's really good.
That help?
I think we couldn't ask for a better bow. So I think not saying you're going to get a job at JCPenney's in the holiday.
No, put your finger right there with this tied up.
Thanks again, Karl, for all your insight and wisdom on this. I really appreciate it. It's something that I think even the scripture that we bring up, it's sometimes seems like it's just a child's story or something like that to, just, we're putting on these little suits of armor and it's a fun demonstration for the kids, but it goes so much deeper than that.
Well, it's good to understand, have concrete images for us, but you don't stop at the concrete images. You take what's the truth underneath that, and the character of God, that's really big stuff.
Yeah.
It's mature stuff. When God begins to create us after a fashion that imitates Him, which is a good portion of Ephesians 5, be imitators of God. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's all over the candidate. The characteristics of Christ, the characteristics of God. He makes us into His image, the image of Christ, who is Himself in the full image of God. That makes perfectly good sense.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for that. And thanks to everyone who is listening out there. Really do appreciate your time. And thanks for joining us. If you have any questions or concerns, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.